in recognizing different benefits and how we can use different tools to enable us to have that really beautiful deep sleep. Now, what we're going to be looking at today is really a very fast understanding about the key to unlocking longevity and vitality, because of course this is what the whole day, whole weekend is all about. So why does sleep matter for longevity? So there's a number of reasons why it matters. We know that sleep is the foundation of all our health. Now, when it comes to the foundation, we often talk about the 3 pillars of health. And those 3 pillars of health are nutrition, exercise, and sleep. But actually, the foundations of both of those, being exercise and nutrition, is sleep. Because it doesn't matter what food you're putting into your body. If you're paying the most expensive organic foods, if you're not sleeping well, your body's not going to absorb those nutrients at its optimal. So it's really important. If we're looking at exercise, we know that if you are not sleeping well, we are much more prone to accidents. And also we don't get that real benefit if our body isn't rested and restored. And so therefore, I think there's one thing that you're going to take away from today is that there is nothing more important than sleep, or there is one more thing, the only thing that's more important than sleep, and that's breathing. Without sleep, we don't function. Very interesting, a really lovely early recent paper was linked to poor sleep is linked to accelerated aging and chronic diseases. And although technology is really having a very negative on our overall health, we actually have to thank technology because it is giving us the ability to see how important sleep is. And sleep is a really new science. And with the onset of MRI imaging, we've now been able to see the importance of sleep. So with a study from Oxford, also the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition has showed us that quality sleep supports cellular repair and, again, longevity. So how does poor sleep shorten our lifespan? Now, we know that sleep deprivation affects something called the telomere length. So I've got a little bit of a prop here. Does anybody know what a telomere is? Anybody know from your biology? Okay, what is it? Yeah, so it is. So what a telomere is, it's the little, if we look at a typical shoelace and you've got the end part of the shoelace, the telomere is the bit that is on the end and it helps to keep the DNA together. So that's why the telomere is so important and is a biomarker for aging. The shorter our telomere, the shorter the tip, the quicker we are aging. And so again, with the recent science, it's really helping us understand about how longevity is linked to sleep. We also know that poor sleep results in many degenerative diseases, and we know that it increases the risk of heart disease. We also know that it increases diabetes, just a few. There was a very important study when it came to diabetes, and they had a group of healthy 25 to 35-year-old adults, and they shortened their sleep consistently for 5 nights. And after 5 nights, the group that had the shortened sleep of 5 hours or less, their bloods were pre-diabetic, which is really, really frightening when we look at the incidence of diabetes, in the Western world. So again, like we were saying, the impact on cognitive function and emotional regulation is also severely impaired when we're not getting adequate sleep. So when it comes to adequate sleep, because this is a question I am asked constantly. Now, if we're looking, let's just have a little look about what the science of our sleep looks like. So does anybody know what a sleep cycle, the duration of one sleep cycle is? Now, it's slightly different for a child than it is for an adult, But does anybody know how long our sleep cycle is? 7 hours, 4 hours, 90 minutes. Okay, so it's 90. Well, it's 90 to 110, and that very much depends on you as an individual. Now, very often we talk about, an optimal night of sleep is that of 8 hours. And now that you know that an average sleep cycle is 90 minutes, it clearly, the maths don't add up, and so it's not 8 hours. Now, you might require 8 hours so that you're in bed maybe 20 minutes before you fall asleep, and maybe 20 minutes after you wake up, which gives you that 7 hours, because what you are all really looking at is, are you a 7-hour sleeper or are you a 9-hour sleeper for your optimal health? So I'm a 7-hour sleeper. My husband is 9 hours and possibly 15, but there we are. Now, what's really, really interesting is that my 3 daughters, who are 37 today, 37, 33, and 29, their sleep and their optimal sleep was very evident as babies. So my eldest daughter, she was a 9-hour sleeper as a child, and that's what she is today as an adult. My second daughter is very much like me. She was a 7-hour sleeper as a child and is very much the same as myself now. And then my youngest daughter, interestingly, she would love to be a 7-hour sleeper, but actually her genetics, she's a 9-hour. We can't really go against the biology of our sleep. Okay, so in terms of sleep science, we know that our sleep cycle is 90 minutes as an adult. We know that in order to get our optimal sleep needs met, we need to identify, are we a 7-hour sleeper or are we a 9-hour sleeper? Now, I know that my need is being met when I can wake in the morning without an alarm clock, when I wake up and I feel rested. So that's how I am very certain of whether I'm a 7 or a 9-hour. Do you have a question? Go on. We'll do the questions at the end if that's okay, but yeah, more questions the better. Okay, so 7 hours. Now, I know I have here stage 1, 2, 3, and 4, but depending on what literature you're looking at, there's a wonderful neuroscientist called Matthew Walker. And actually, Matthew Walker was the first neuroscientist that's actually made sleep sexy. Now, he wrote the book, Why We Sleep, which actually reads like a horror movie, because that really demonstrates when we're not getting enough sleep, what it's doing to our body, particularly in how we age. So, and he talks about 5 stages, so stage 1, 2, 3, 4, but a lot of the new science is bringing, or literature is bringing 3 and 4 together, and then rapid eye movement. Okay, so stage 1 is that very light sleep. And it is, where often you'll be falling asleep and you'll go like that. And it's simply when you're going into the next stage of your sleep cycle. Now, stage 2 was still a light sleep, and stage 2 lasts 30 to 60 minutes approximately. But this is so exciting about the stage 2, because in stage 2 is where we have sleep spindles. Now, sleep spindles are these electrical impulses that happen in our sleep. And we know, for example, that as little as a 9-minute nap has shown to increase the accuracy and the performance of Olympic athletes. So there was a wonderful study where they were looking at basketball players, and their accuracy increased just by having that 9-minute nap. And that's primarily because it happened, they got the sleep spindles. Now, if we're looking at longevity and aging, the studies are showing us that as we age, our sleep quality changes. And they're also saying that as our sleep quality changes, our sleep spindles decrease. Now, I'm still not certain about this research, because most of the research that is taking place, over all the last 40, 50, 60, 100 years even, has all been done on men, not women. Sleep studies only happened on women, included women, only in the late 1950s, 1960s. And I actually heard a neuroscientist recently, and she said, we just don't do sleep on women because it's too difficult. So how accurate are these studies? And the second thing is most of the sleep research literature is on people with chronic conditions. So, quite a lot of us are not fitting into that. So don't get too bogged down with it, because I really feel my sleep spindles are really high. And we know that what is going to increase our sleep spindles is deep learning. So keep your learning, and that's going to help with your sleep spindles, which is really important for memory. Okay, now I didn't put it on here, but there's also something else that happens in stage 2, and that is your K complex. So your K complex and your sleep spindles, not only does it help convert memory from our short-term memory to our long-term memory, but it also helps us stay asleep. So, for example, I was working with somebody recently, and they were on an antidepressant, and they've been on this antidepressant for about 15 years. And they were really struggling with their sleep. It was a very low dose, and they were informed that it isn't really impacting your sleep. So don't worry, that's not impacting your sleep at all. Actually, I know that this particular antidepressant, amitriptyline, it is impacting his sleep. And that's because it's changing the architecture of his sleep. And I think it had a definite impact on his stage 2. So, we all have a responsibility to make the best of our own health and not expect the medical field really to take that responsibility to, completely. Although I'm Irish, I grew up in England, and we have the NHS. And there is still a very large cohort who expect the NHS to look after them. We have to look after ourselves. Okay, everyone knows about stage 3. Stage 3 is that deep, deep sleep. Stage 3 is where the human growth hormone is released. And stage 3 is where, you're in that deep sleep and it's more difficult to wake up. Now, what's also interesting here about stage 3 is that if we're looking at the very first half of our night, up until about 4 o'clock in the morning, we get a lot more of the deep sleep. Now, something else that I find really, really fascinating and was only discovered, and that this is just showing you how new the sleep science is. It was only in 2012 that a very important function of the brain was discovered. Now, up until 2012, it was thought that we only have what's known as the lymphatic system. So the drainage of all the cellular waste in our body. But actually, in 2012, something really fascinating was discovered. And they discovered that the brain itself has its own drainage system, and it's called the glymphatic. Now, in the very first half of our night, up until approximately 4 o'clock, this is when your glymphatic system is at its most effective. And we also know there's a very good correlation between the removals of toxins such as tau and beta amyloid. When these toxins are removed, which is in the first half of the night, the incidence of Alzheimer's is reduced considerably. So again, I certainly grew up with my grandmother telling me that an hour before midnight is worth 3 hours after. And of course, she didn't have the science of that, but ultimately, she's not that far wrong. We also know in patients with Alzheimer's, the sleep spindles are considerably reduced. Okay, so deep 3, and then last is your rapid eye movement, which of course is where all our dreams happen. And that dreaming is all about emotional processing. If you've had a particularly stressful day and you go to sleep at night, that's where your brain makes sense of what has happened. There's some very famous artists that have written songs during their sleep. If we look at who was it? One of the Beatles, Paul McCartney wrote one of his most famous songs, which I can't remember now, but one of his most famous songs, he woke up and he had dreamt this song. I think it was Ruby Tuesday. No, sorry, it wasn't Ruby Tuesday, because that's somebody else. But it was certainly one of the Beatles, and they wrote one of their most favourite songs and famous songs. Okay, so that's a very quick history or science explanation of our sleep. So let's have a look at biohacking your sleep for longevity. So when we know that there is two mechanisms that we need for sleep, and without it, no one can sleep, child or adult. The first mechanism that we need for sleep is our circadian rhythm. And this is really fascinating, and it is the hierarchy of our sleep. And again, if there's one thing that you take away from here today, light exposure is going to be what is going to determine your very good sleep. So the minute you wake up in the morning is going to determine how well you sleep. If you can, please avoid looking at your phone as soon as you wake up in the morning. Now, the reason for that is when you look at your phone first thing in the morning, it's the blue light. The brain perceives that blue light that comes off your phone as 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Your brain is given a shock because it thinks it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So you have a huge spike in cortisol. Now, of course, we want that cortisol spike to tell us what time it is and start the day, but actually we want it from a natural cortisol spike, not from your phone. So light is such an important aspect. Now, it doesn't need to be a lot. As little as 3 minutes is enough to strengthen that circadian rhythm to help your sleep that night. 5 minutes ideally, and if it's a very cloudy day, you want 10 minutes. So light is so important. Temperature control. Temperature is hugely important for our sleep, and sleeping in a cool cave-like environment also helps our sleep. Now, why it helps our sleep is because in the evening, we have a hormone called melatonin that signals to the brain that sleep is coming soon. So melatonin in the evening is really, really high, and the cortisol is really low. Now, as the night wears on, the melatonin rotates round and the cortisol increases. If we are too warm, that signals to the brain to push up your cortisol, and it wakes us early. And so the distribution of deep sleep and poor sleep is not supported by too warm a bedroom. And you're really looking at anything between 15 and 21 degrees Celsius for a good night's sleep. There's different supplements. We're all talking about supplements, and if we walk around here today, you can see that there are certain supplements that we are told or advised or encouraged to be taking to support better sleep. Magnesium. Magnesium is responsible for over 300 chemical reactions in our body. And modern day farming now does not allow us to get the nutrients from the soil to come into our body, which then maintains our magnesium levels. Why magnesium is so important? It's known as the sleep mineral because it actually relaxes our central nervous system, which of course then helps us sleep better. Omega-3, again, is one of the foundations of boosting our melatonin, boosting the serotonin, which also helps with our sleep. And adaptogens. Adaptogens are something like ashwagandha. Ashwagandha is an adaptogen, which again, what it does, it reduces the cortisol, reduces stress, which again helps with our sleep. So all of these things are really helping when it comes to supporting our sleep. Now, one of the things that I'm quite excited about today is talking about the weighted blanket. Now, a weighted blanket was initially first introduced for children with ADHD. And what they found was when using a weighted blanket for children with ADHD, not only did they fall asleep faster, but they also stayed asleep. And the really wonderful outcome was that their sleep was deeper. So that was very positive. And so now there is more and more research which is showing us that it isn't just to benefit children. It's really benefiting all of us because we can use it now as a therapeutic tool. Now, why a weighted blanket is so helpful is because it gives us deep pressure stimulation, and it does mimic a hug for relaxation. Now, if we're talking about a hug, we're just talking about, oh, it's, you know, a little bit fuzzy, and actually it's not. It is so much more, because when we have, our body is full of oxytocin receptors. Now, oxytocin is what is commonly known as the love hormone. And that's what, you know, helps us feel better. It boosts the melatonin, it boosts the serotonin. And serotonin is such an important building block for melatonin. And therefore, by sleeping with a weighted blanket, that can really help have that deeper sleep and a longer sleep. And that's why there are so many studies now that are showing us that a weighted blanket really does help with the reduction of anxiety. There's a very large children's hospital in London, the Avelina, and they were carrying out a very large study with children, not just with ADHD, but a whole host of anxiety issues. And the outcome of the study was that they didn't feel it certainly looking at the outcome, it didn't improve their sleep particularly. However, once they were asked to return their blankets, not one single child willingly gave the blanket back. They all wanted to keep with this weighted blanket. Now, again, it's not, the research won't really be available because it is, again, so new about the studies with the weighted blanket. So if it works for you, another lady that I had an adult who her sleep was awful, and her sleep had been terrible since she was a young child. Her sleep had always been terrible. The first thing is about changing your narrative. I am a terrible sleeper. No, we're not. We just haven't learnt. Because unlike back in the caveman days, sleep then was intuitive. But now, because of living in the modern world, sleep is no longer intuitive. And sleep is a learnt behavior. So if it works for you, then use that weighted blanket. Now, when this lady put this weighted blanket on the first night that she slept with this weighted blanket, she said she absolutely cried, because the relaxation and the sense of feeling safe was something that she hadn't anticipated, and she thought, ugh, this is not true, and she used it again and again, and now I can guarantee and I can say that she is a much, much better sleeper. If we're looking at, again, when it comes to practical sleep optimization strategies,